Hello BookTube, my name is Juan, I am just one reader, and I am coming to you today with one of my favorite videos to make every single year, and that is the list of the worst books that I read in 2022. In this list, you will find some gems that are just so disappointing, repugnant, atrocious, preposterous, boring. I think boring is the worst sin that any book can commit. Like, you can be repugnant, you can be incorrect, you can be evil, you can be anything except boring. If you are boring, you will make it into the list. I feel like every year I have to make the same disclaimer. Number one, I am a salty mother effer when it comes to making this video every single year. I am very salty. I am a bitter, grumpy old man. I have no reservations and no quibbles, just saying what I think of these books. So don't take this video very personally or too seriously. Take it just like fun, light entertainment. Because if you do take this video seriously, you will unsubscribe to my channel, which I don't really mind, but you will have a bitter day. And I don't want you to have a bitter day. I want you to be able to have a laugh and just, let's just laugh together. So another disclaimer I have to make is that some of these books, well, all of the books are here in this list for different reasons, and I will sort of explain those reasons as we go on with the video. Some of the authors and genres in this list are actually some of my favorites. Like there's a couple of authors in here that I'm like, how could this author that has pleased me so greatly in the past with some amazing books, how can the same author now disappoint me or just hurt me so badly with this atrocious book? So you will encounter some authors that I do recommend checking out, but not these works. So without any further ado, come with me, join me in this journey of negativity. Let's embrace negativity for just one day, because a lot of booktubers are like, oh my god, no, only positive vibes, #blessed. No, in this channel, we say it as it is. So without any further ado, these are the top 10 worst books that I read in 2022. Coming in at number 10, Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier, and it pains me to put Daphne du Maurier in one of these lists. She's one of my favorite authors ever, but Jamaica Inn is not really a bad book. I would actually recommend that you pick this book up if you are new to Daphne du Maurier's writing. The problem for me specifically is that I have already read and enjoyed immensely many of her works, and so when I came to this book, I found it just very inferior and very lacking, which makes sense because this was one of the first novels, if not the first novel that she wrote. So you can really see that she is still honing her craft and finding her voice and, learning how to craft a story. Now, that being said, this book has the Daphne du Maurier trademarks, the staples of du Maurier, the suspenseful, gloomy, atmospheric writing with romance and suspense and some really shocking images and scenes. So I couldn't say that I didn't like this book as a book. I just didn't like having read it in the order in which I read it, because I was always constantly comparing it to much better works by the author. So that's number 10. Number 9 is The Dragon Bone Chair by Tad Williams, which is the first installment in the much acclaimed, highly praised Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy. This is a book and a trilogy and an author that people had been recommending for me since I was born, almost. And I was so incredibly ready to fall in love with this, with a new fantasy author, a fantasy world, a universe, a magic system, everything. And I was very disappointed because I think the book started out really well. It actually reminded me of Robin Hobb, the Fitz books. We were following Simon, this character living in this castle, and I was really enjoying the slow burn quality of the book, and then the magic felt very dark and pagan, which I loved. But then I found that the rest of the book became incredibly fast-paced for me, and I just sort of lost track of everything that was going on. There was a lot of things that were introduced in the book, and I sort of lost track and I lost interest. It's a book that maybe I will come back to one day, I don't know when, but so far I am not continuing on with the rest of the series. Coming in at number 8, Under Major Domo Minor by Patrick DeWitt. This is another author that I never thought would make it into one of my worst of the year lists, because one of his other novels, French Exit, is one of my favorite books. It's such a witty, poignant, incredibly, deliriously hilarious novel, and very smart. And this one I thought was like a... how can I explain it? It was like the Wes Anderson movie that you don't want to see. It was like a Wes Anderson book, except I didn't really find it all that funny or all that witty. The story itself and the characters themselves left a lot to be desired, so I was really expecting, you know, something witty and clever and fun, and it was just fine. If you haven't read anything like this kind of Wes Anderson-y vibe in literature, maybe go ahead and try this, but honestly, just go and read French Exit instead. It's much better. Coming in at number 7 is The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories by Ken Liu. Now, this book, oh my god, where to start? This book is a book that people adore. Like, this is a booktube darling, and people that I really love and whose opinion I really trust have adored this book, and they have really sold this book to me. Wow, I could not disagree more. Now, granted, there are some stories in this collection that I really thought were splendid, but the rest of the book, yeesh, this book was way too long, and the stories overall I didn't really like. I don't like Ken Liu's writing style. You know, I am a very writing style oriented kind of reader, so if I don't enjoy the writing style, it's very hard for me to really get into the book, and that was the case here, certainly. Like I said, some great stories, but the writing style was just really not for me, and more than anything else, this book really got on my nerves. It was so irritating because I felt like there was an agenda, like a propaganda agenda that was being pushed onto me, and it just reminded me of when I read The Overstory by Richard Powers. It was so yucky. I don't like when you can see the author, like the master puppeteer, backstage behind the scenes, just telling you what you need to hear and what the message is. Ugh. Coming in at number 6 is Red Country by Joe Abercrombie, which is a standalone in the First Law universe or series. Now, I really enjoyed the First Law trilogy, but the standalones have been very, very disappointing. Best Served Cold almost made it into this list just because of how mediocre and regular it was, which is really one of the worst adjectives that you can use describing a book, regular. But Red Country was just really boring. And that is, like I said at the beginning of the video, that's a sin that I cannot allow in my life, being boring. Red Country is essentially a Western with very little fantasy elements. I found it completely boring, completely unnecessary, and completely inconsequential. So for me, that's one of those reading experiences where at the end I'm like, why did I read 400 pages of this? Sure, there was a story, there were characters, there was action, there was a big surprise, kind of, but really nothing matters. So yeah, very, very let down by Joe Abercrombie, which is another one of those authors that I never thought would make it into my worst of the year list, because, you know, he's a really great writer, he's a great stylist, and a great author of voice. But this story was just completely unnecessary to me. Coming in at number 5, Now is the Hour by Tom Spanbauer, another book that I had been highly anticipating. It's a coming-of-age gay story. Hello? Like, The only thing that this book could have had on top of that, that could have made it more like better fitted to me, was if Stephen Sondheim was in this book, or Freud. So I was really hoping that this book would deliver the goods. It did not. This book was incredibly boring. It was meandering, but not in like the good way, because I do like slow burn books. I do like books that are very character driven, explorations of character, deep personality explorations. And I love reading about a person's, coming of age and all of that. But this was just so boring and long and mind-numbingly boring. So I could not say one single attribute that I liked about this book. And on top of that, the word cheese is like, it's repeated throughout the book. There's a lot of mentions of cheese and metaphors of cheese, and I cannot stand cheese or the idea of cheese. I am cheese phobic, if that's a word. So no, ugh, yuck. Coming in at number 4 is a book that you probably haven't heard about, so I'm just going to mention it very briefly. This is a German novel, The King of Buffoons by Tanja Kinkel, and it's a spin-off novel of The Never-Ending Story. The Never-Ending Story by Michael Ende being one of my favorite books, if not my favorite novel of all time. And so there's a bunch of German or European, I think all German authors who have crafted spin-off novels within the same universe as The Never-Ending Story, which is the kingdom of Fantasia. This is the first novel in that spin-off series, and I could not believe how bad this was. It was boring, it was mediocre, it was, again, regular. That awful adjective, regular. But what I really found offensive and insulting was that it was taking my favorite universe, Fantasia, from The Never-Ending Story. And so I just felt like this felt like prostitution to me. This felt like exploitation of something that I adore. And so I just found it sort of evil. Now, coming in at number 3 is a book that many people on BookTube have adored, and this is when things get controversial in this video. Empire of the Vampire, which is one of the worst titles I've ever come across in my life. This is by J. Kristoff, and this book is objectively one of the worst things I've ever read in my life. It was so funny. I was laughing out loud at some point in this book, just thinking, how am I reading this? How did this book actually get published? It was it was atrocious. It was funny. So it's a fantasy, but with like a very gothic, sort of satanic, vampiric vibe. It's about vampires, duh. But it's not scary, it's not fantastical either. The magic doesn't feel like magic to me. It felt very, it felt like a video game. And I don't like video games. I've never been a video game player. I don't like the aesthetic of, reading a book that feels like a video game, if that makes any sense, which is the same way that I felt about the movie Avatar, The Way of Water. I walked out of that movie because I felt like I was watching a horribly looking video game. It felt kind of uncanny valley. Well, that's Avatar. That's my review for Avatar, The Way of Water, one of the worst movies I've seen this year. But anyway, coming back to Empire of the Vampire, this book was very, very young adultish. Like all of the bad characteristics of young adult literature in here. But on top of that, what I really, really couldn't get on board with was, you guessed it, the writing style. Oh my God, like Janice from Friends. Oh my God, the writing style. Jesus Christ, what is going on with this person, J. Kristoff? Man, you really need to learn how to write. This is the worst writing style and the worst use of the English language that I've ever come across. The worst writing style. Absolutely hilariously bad. It was Anyway, I don't even want to spend a lot of time talking about this book because it was so badly written. Don't read it. Coming in at number 2, The Changeling by Victor Laval. This book, again, I was so excited to pick it up. The first like 50, 100 pages of this book were fairly interesting and promising. It's a little bit like a modern fairy tale in New York City. There's like a weird fairy tale, dark fairy tale retelling. So things were looking very promising. And then the rest of the book happened. And this book became so ridiculous, so bizarre in the worst possible way. It's a book that, again, I was laughing out loud by the end that, such a promising premise had gone south so badly. Like, there's very, very, very little that I can say about this book in terms of redeeming qualities. The writing is not very good. It's not very distinctive or very special. The story is absolutely the worst. And yeah, just don't read this book. It's long, it's boring, it's ridiculous, and it's just silly. It feels silly. And it's not silly like Under Major Domo Minor by Patrick DeWitt, which is supposed to be kind of silly. This feels very full of itself, very grandiose, and you can really see that the author speaks in a very sort of important, magnanimous way. Like, you can see that the author thinks very highly of his writing and of his craft, and it's just such a silly, bad novel. Stay away. And finally, we come to my number 1 worst book that I read in 2022. And yes, I will be controversial and I will choose The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, the first book in the Stormlight archive. This book, there's many things that I have already said about this book in another video that a lot of people comment on, and a lot of people give me hate on that video. I can completely understand it because a lot of people are very protective about this book and this author. I think this book can work for some readers, and I won't deny that. I won't deny that this book could appeal to a certain kind of reader, but to me, this felt so repressed, so plasticky, so unreal. This is supposed to be an epic fantasy, and to me, it was completely devoid of magic, completely devoid of fantasy. For me, fantasy is all about the feeling of awe and wonder, and that kind of spark that is not in here. This just felt like watching a superhero movie, or like a video game. Again, I don't like superheroes. I don't think I've ever watched a superhero movie, honestly. Any of the Marvel, I stay away from that. You might think I am super obnoxious for saying that, but that's true. I don't watch superhero movies. I don't enjoy video games. So this book felt like all of those things to me. But more than anything else, what I thought, the book was long and boring and very, very, very badly written. I think Brandon Sanderson has a very simple, regular, plain writing style. I was bored throughout the book, which is a long book, because the writing style is so... It's like tasting cardboard. It's the complete opposite of lifelike, charismatic writing. It was completely just serviceable. But the number one thing that I hated about this book is that I think Brandon Sanderson is destroying the genre of fantasy. It was completely devoid of any imagination or creativity that children actually have. This felt incredibly, like, millimetrically, precisely crafted. Like this was written with an Excel spreadsheet in mind. That's how it felt to me. Like it was so calculated and repressed and bland. There was nothing in here. It was like a white piece of paper. That's how I felt about The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I am never reading this author again. I've already tried reading him previously, and he is just a horrible author to me. So there you go. Those are my top 10 worst books that I read in 2022. How much do you hate me by now? I hope not so much, but if you do, stay tuned and come back, because next week I will be presenting you with my top 10 best books that I read in 2022. Thanks for watching.